Hi, this is Mrs. Brown from Research Triangle High School. The purpose of this video is to talk a little bit about the play Hamlet and specifically about how the characters die. The order in which they die, like who dies first and who dies last, and the manner in which they die, and how these two factors help to contribute to Shakespeare's development of the theme. Now, the first death that occurs in the play is the murder of King Hamlet. Even though this happens before the play begins, it is the inciting incident that takes the whole play and launches all of the action of the play. So we know that King Hamlet died unconfessed because he was asleep, so he didn't have a chance to confess his sins. So when he died, he was not in a state of grace. And we know that he has this unrest and the injustice of his death unbalances the whole moral order of the kingdom of Denmark. So this is really typical in a Shakespearean play, where in the first act, there's some sort of an inciting incident that unbalances the usual order that things should happen in, and that the hero or a protagonist comes along and it's their job to kind of restore order to the universe. Throughout the whole play, you see this tension going back and forth on trying to get things back. And this is where we get the line, something's rotten in the state of Denmark, the time is out of joint. The fact that the old king has been murdered and is not at rest because he died without having a chance to confess his sins, and that Hamlet's job is to revenge his father and thereby restore justice to the kingdom. And this is what makes all of the rest of the play begin to happen. Now, the first death that actually occurs within the play is Polonius. And this is really a simple matter of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, we know that this is also kind of a fitting death because we think about everything we know about Polonius. He's always spying and hiding, and he was killed because he was spying and hiding. If he hadn't been doing any of those things, he wouldn't have been behind the curtain. Hamlet would have known who it was, and he wouldn't have thought that it was Claudius instead and stabbed at him. At the same time, he is innocent of any mortal sins, and he dies very quickly and without any heartache. We presume, at least, that it's a fairly quick death. But we do see that Polonius is the very first death, and this death that shows Hamlet's lapse in judgment, the one time Hamlet does decide to just kind of act without thinking, and it turns out it's exactly the wrong thing to do. And it's this particular sin and death that Hamlet's going to have to atone for by the end of the play. But that's the first death that we see within the context of the play itself. The second death that we hear about within the play is the death of Ophelia. Now, she probably died because of her madness and having this accident where she fell into the water. There's a little bit of an implication of suicide because she doesn't do anything to help herself after she's floating down the river and her clothing soaks up all the water and she falls down. And that possibly, suicide. Some of the grave diggers talk about whether or not she should even be buried in sacred ground. And there's even a hint, possibly, of murder. When she's crazy and going around and saying things that maybe Claudius picks up on some of this, and he does say, follow her carefully, give her good watch. Is this somebody see her in her madness and kind of give her a push? But that's sort of reading between the lines a little bit. But even so, we know that she dies because she falls in the river and she drowns. Now, why does Ophelia have to die? What did she do that was wrong? Well, in the play, she betrays her true feelings and possibly her loss of innocence. If she does indeed sleep with Hamlet without being married to him, it's a little severe a punishment, we know, but there is this idea that she's not strong enough to speak her own mind, that she doesn't trust Hamlet, she doesn't trust Hamlet's love for her or her love for him, and it's this tension between what her father tells her to do, what her brother tells her to do, what Hamlet tells her to do, that she's just too weak, and that's what kind of breaks apart her mind and her brain. And that she knows about and is grieving over her father's death, and is this possibly the idea that she has to go through that particular pain, a kind of punishment for betraying his trust if she did indeed not follow his word if she slept with Hamlet. So there's some interesting ways to think about Ophelia's death and why she dies at that particular point in the play. And towards the very end of the play, we get this announcement that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have died. But if you kind of follow it chronologically, they were dying someplace in the middle of the action here. And we know that they die in Hamlet's place, that they were carrying these messages that were from King Claudius that told the King of England to kill this person as soon as they got there. This was to be Hamlet. And instead, Hamlet switches the notes out. So it kind of makes sense because they really should have been there for their friend, And in the end, they were there in their friend's place. And they're kind of punished because of their disloyalty and their dishonesty. And those are kind of two of the things that are the top big bad things that Hamlet cannot stand, is this idea that people would betray him and then are lying and aren't what they seem. And he tries so many times to say to them directly, tell me the truth, tell me why you're here, tell me why you were sent for. And they are instead staying loyal to the king and the king's payroll. And that's kind of where we see this announcement in the middle of the play that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have died, presumably being put to death when they arrived on the shores of England. Now, the third death that we see in the play is Gertrude. And said, well, why does Gertrude have to die as punishment here? Well, she was either unfaithful to her husband. There's some implication that maybe this affair with Claudius was happening even before the old King Hamlet had died, or at the very least that she was indiscreet, that she married so quickly and that she went ahead and married her own brother-in-law. However, when she does die, she is able to warn Hamlet. So she's able to say at the very end, Hamlet, watch out, something's happening. So she has kind of a purpose in her death, and she does make peace with Hamlet before she dies. We see that whole scene before the fight scene with Laertes, where Hamlet goes to her bedroom and convinces her that she shouldn't sleep with Claudius anymore, to abandon his bed, and she does. So Gertrude dies kind of in this state of grace where she's sort of repented of marrying Claudius and all of that. And she is spared seeing Hamlet die. As far as she knows, with her dying breath, she has warned Hamlet and she has saved her son. So she does kind of die with that bit of comfort, as it may be. So the fourth death in the play is Laertes, and as he even says, I am justly killed with my own treachery. He also is able to make a confession. He says, I'm guilty of this, and forgive Hamlet before he dies. And he's the one that's able to identify and say, the king's to blame is the chief culprit. So he does end up dying because of his own part in the plot, that he was plotting to murder Hamlet here, but he does die in a state of grace and a state of forgiveness. And again, his death does accomplish some purpose in helping to corroborate that the king is the one who's going to be responsible for all of these other things. And then finally, the death we have been waiting for this entire play. We get Claudius's death. Hamlet has been waiting and trying to figure out exactly the right moment, and here it is finally. So Claudius, get this, dies in public disgrace. So everyone sees him happen. Everyone's pointing at him. Everyone knows he was guilty. He causes and then has to witness the death of the woman that he said he loved, but he allowed her to go ahead and drink the poison rather than betray himself. But that's exactly what ended up happening. And then he has a double death. He's not only stabbed by Hamlet, he's also poisoned by having to drink that. And again, it's his own treachery. What is the reason that there's a sharpened sword in that room? What is the reason that there's poison in that room? He put it there. It causes his death. And he dies unconfessed and dishonored, which is exactly where Hamlet wanted him. So Hamlet finally achieves his revenge with this particular death in the play. And the final death that we see in the play is the death of Hamlet himself, the protagonist. Now remember, this is fairly typical of Shakespearean tragedies, where the protagonist, with his death or his actions, restores order in the universe of the play, but he does so usually because there's something he's done that he can't return from, and he ends up having to pay that price. So Hamlet killed Polonius. Polonius was completely innocent. He was kind of an irritating character, but he didn't do anything that deserved death. And Hamlet was also responsible for Ophelia's madness. And also, even though we can talk about how much he liked Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but Hamlet did directly cause their death there as well. But he dies nobly, and he dies after completing his task. So he does what his father tells him to do, which is to avenge his murder. Presumably now his father can leave purgatory and can be at peace, and he lives to see justice done. So when Hamlet dies, he knows that all of these things have happened. And he dies in a state of grace, forgiven and confessed. He tells people about it. He shakes hands with Laertes. And his final line, the rest is silence, these last four words, is kind of his answer to that question, to be or not to be, when he's thinking about what is death going to be like. And you could take this as the rest is in the rest of his story is silence, like the rest of my life is over, the rest is silence, or as rest here refer to sleep as in the sleep of death. And this is his answer. What is death actually like? The rest, that is the death, the sleep of death, is silence. It's peace. even though we've had the death of the main character, there's a few other things that are happening structurally that are really important to understanding the concept of this five-act tragedy. So we see Horatio wanting to die, but Hamlet says, you don't get to be that lucky. He says, absent thee from felicity, in other words, happiness, like you're not allowed to get rid of life. And in this harsh world, draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. So Horatio is Hamlet saying, you're not allowed to get out of life. Remember, Hamlet thinks life is all painful and terrible, and he keeps talking about how he wishes that this too solid flesh would melt, that he could just die and get rid of all of these things, but he can't. But he tells Horatio, you have a job to do. You have to tell my story. Hamlet needs Horatio to let everyone else know the whole background. Horatio knows about the ghost, about Hamlet's plans, about the pretending of madness and all of this. And we see Horatio as the person to do this because he was Hamlet's true friend, and he was this objective kind of outside witness that other people will believe. So Hamlet tells Horatio, you must live and tell my tale aright. He says, what a terrible name he'll leave after himself. What would people think about who Hamlet is? This guy that went nuts and ran around stabbing people on the stage there. If Horatio was not there to really explain the truth of exactly what Claudius had done and what Hamlet was trying to accomplish. And so the last main action of the play is Fortinbras's final arrival. This has been foreshadowed for the whole play. Fortinbras is getting ready. Fortinbras is going to march. Fortinbras is sending papers. Fortinbras is on his way. And Fortinbras's arrival means the balance is restored to Denmark. Because when you leave that final scene, you have all those bodies on the stage. Who's going to be the next king? And Fortinbras represents that balance between Laertes, who acts too quickly and does the wrong thing, and Hamlet, who doesn't act quickly enough and takes too long and ends up doing other things along the way in the purpose of accomplishing his goals. Here's Fortinbras, and remember, all three of these characters are sons who have lost fathers who are trying to get revenge on their father's death. Fortinbras is the one who gets it right. He doesn't act too fast, but he doesn't take too much time to think it over either. He has a steady march, the steady plan, and when we get to the end of the play in Fortinbras' arrival, it means we have that balance restored again to Denmark, and that all of the people connected with the injustice in this kingdom have basically been purged, and we can have this restoration of order in the universe that was upset when Claudius put things out of their natural order by murdering his own brother at the very beginning of the play. And so that's the end, just some ways to think about the way that the order and the style in which the characters die helps to convey Shakespeare's message and purpose in this play.